Why do they always ruin all the things I like? Hi, my name is Sydney, welcome back to hell. And as per usual, before we launch in, today's video is sponsored by Foom. Now, I think it's pretty well established at this point that society has experienced a major shift in what it considers beautiful and attractive in the last number of years. And no, I'm not just talking about makeup and clothing, I'm also talking about whatever the hell it is that Gen Z is doing. I don't often venture onto their part of the internet, but when I do, duh. This shift in attractiveness is happening all over the place, in media, entertainment, film, and television, but one of the areas that people seem to talk about the most is video games. I actually started writing this video with the intention of covering this whole topic in its totality, but I very quickly realized there was a lot to it, so I've broken it up and consider this video number 1, with video number 2 and maybe more than that coming, I don't know, probably just 1 and 2. That's enough, I think. Now, about a month ago, The Gamer published an article titled "Stop Using Mods to Make Female Characters Prettier." The article explains that after the release of the game Baldur's Gate 3, several mods were created to make female characters in the game more attractive. Specifically, Lae'zel, or however this is pronounced, and Shadowheart. Lae'zel pronunciation, alright. Help me, internet.
Eyes. Another one. My friend's blood not enough.
Who writes these names, bro? The author makes the argument that if people need to make female characters into the perfect woman, then they don't view these characters as a whole, but as commodities. The writer then goes on to say that if female characters need to meet impossible beauty standards in order for players to connect with them, then their value is only skin deep. Funnily enough, we've actually seen a ton of criticism around the appearances of several female protagonists, not only in the last number of years, but also in the last several months. Some notable examples are Aloy from Horizon Forbidden West, Mortal Kombat's Tanya, and Fable's new lead heroine, whose name I don't know, because although I looked on the internet didn't tell me, and then I just got sick of looking for it, and now we're gonna call her Mrs. Magoo. Even if you do a very basic online search about this topic, you will find countless articles and forums discussing why female characters are getting progressively uglier and uglier. People are apparently not a fan of this. At all. What I think is interesting is that the deliberate desexualization of female characters in video games has been happening already for some time. Over the years, more and more criticism has been thrown at video game creators, with particular groups demanding women be treated less like fun dolls and more like actual people. There's been some success with that, to be completely honest, but it seems like in this quest to undo the hypersexualization in video games, devs have taken things way too far in the opposite direction. To the point where people are beginning to think that female characters are being made deliberately uglier to not only appeal to a wider audience, but also just generally appear more realistic. And as a gamer myself, I find all of this very interesting. So that's what we're going to talk about today: the uglification of female characters in video games, and why this might be happening. And obviously, all of my normal disclaimers here, this video is by no means exhaustive. This will be covering a series of my personal opinions and theories about the topic, but if you want more information, there is a plethora of YouTube videos and articles and commentary and all sorts of things about this very topic that you can go and look at whenever you want. Now, with all of that being said, you know what isn't ugly? You quitting your bad habit, which is why today's video is sponsored by Foom. Maintaining your bad habit can often be expensive, especially right now as we're living through mass inflation. Please spare some change. Not to mention, breaking that bad habit is hard. And at this point, you're tired of hearing everyone's annoying, unsolicited advice. Yes, I'm dressed up as a cow. And no, I don't understand how the peanut butter is going to help. But what if I told you it doesn't have to be miserable, weird, and expensive? Because now, you have Foom. Foom is this nifty little device that serves as an alternative to any hand-to-mouth habit. Foom is not a vape, so instead of heating up harmful chemicals for you to inhale, it uses flavored air. It also comes with an adjustable airflow dial and is designed with moving parts and magnets so that your fingers have something to do. Perfect for de-stressing while you break your bad habit. And remember that flavored air I mentioned? Well, Foom has a range of flavors for you to try, including 3 new ones: orange vanilla, raspberry lemon, and sparkling grapefruit. This one's yummy. You just pop your preferred core in and you're ready to go. So if you too want a yummy way of breaking your bad habit, then click the link in the description or go to tryfoom.com/Sydney or scan the QR code on screen. And don't forget to use code Sydney for 10% off when you try a journey pack. In 2019, a woman called Jacqueline Pavlat gave a TED Talk titled "Where Are Her Clothes?" An analysis of women in video games. During her discussion, Pavlat tried to illustrate her primary argument, that women in video games are scantily clad for no good reason, their armor in battle games is lacking compared to their male counterparts, and developers should be trying to make these female characters more realistic and relatable. Only a month earlier, a similar TED Talk had been given about the voices of female characters in video games. The speaker said that she had studied several popular game franchises and determined that the vocalizations of female characters were limited to 3 primary tropes: the victim, where women cry out in pain or sadness; the sexy witch, who will kick your butt; and the girly girl, who is forced to fight. All of this, she concludes, is not very inspiring, and just like Pavlat in her TED Talk, makes the argument that these tropes are not great for female representation.
With some exceptions, these are the main options. And they're, once again, not very inspiring. We have weakness, we have horror, we have sexuality, and that's it. Those are the options for being a female character. Representation matters. We've heard this a lot, but I'm going to repeat it again. Representation matters. To see and to hear ourselves on screen humanizes us to ourselves, and it humanizes us to others.
Funnily enough, these arguments go all the way back to 1996, when the action-adventure game Tomb Raider first hit shelves around the world. It featured gun-wielding protagonist Lara Croft, a female archaeologist tasked with fighting enemies and solving puzzles in her quest to find a precious artifact. The game was a huge success, marking Lara Croft as one of the most recognizable characters in the gaming world. It also sparked the beginning of the Tomb Raider franchise, giving us more games and films and, of course, plenty of arguing over Lara Croft's overall depiction and sexualization in the original game and those that came after. When Lara Croft first appeared on the scene, she was criticized for her impossibly tiny waist and large breasts. Some users actually created game patches made for the express purpose of removing her clothes. Past video games in the 1980s and early 90s were not advanced enough to really sexualize characters. Although female protagonists were uncommon, those that existed were fully clothed or wearing weird space armor, I guess. But all of this changed with the advancement of graphics and technology. And after the popularity of 1996's Tomb Raider, despite the game's character model still being fairly primitive, there was concern that it would signal to developers that hypersexualized female characters were a way to bolster sales and make a mark on the industry. After all, the majority of gamers were and still are boys and men. And we know that all of you still ooga booga at heart, even if some of you try to hide it. It's okay. Sort of. Now, by the 2000s, the conversation surrounding the hypersexualization of female characters and whether or not they existed solely as a male fantasy became a widely debated issue in the gaming world. One that has seemingly come to a head today, as demonstrated by our aforementioned TED Talks. And it seems that, in an effort to correct the perceived objectification of female characters, the pendulum has swung too far in the opposite direction. Rather than simply toning down the sexualized nature of these characters, which has already been happening for the last number of years, some feel that Western developers and designers have gone the extra mile and deliberately made these characters progressively less and less attractive. I mean, obviously, attraction is subjective, but So if this uglification, for lack of a better word, is happening deliberately, the next question is why? There's a lot of data and information and writings and opinions relating to the sexualization of female characters, but when it comes to this particular topic, what might be guiding game developers and graphic designers and so on and so forth, there's very little in the way of qualitative information. So in the interest of accuracy, I just want to make note of the fact that the majority of the things that I have to say in this video are my personal observations and theories, nothing concrete, unfortunately. Except my desire to see the resurrection of babe characters with amazing grip strength. Not like that, you weirdos. Now, first and foremost, I do think there is something to be said about the integration of more women in the gaming industry as both developers and designers. And to be clear, I do not bring this up to suggest that all women in these industries operate the same way or to tar them with the same brush, but what I'd like to do is hypothesize some of the psychology that might be driving some of these game developers. In 1989, about 30% of the video game industry was female, with the majority of those women holding low-ranking positions. Only 3% were actual developers. Today, this number has jumped to about 30% worldwide, with a further 8% saying they're non-binary or two-spirit or trans, which is honestly just like, case closed. This answers everything. But the sex of developers alone does little to explain why they might be giving us unappealing female characters. After all, we have to assume that women would likely want to see other attractive women, right? Wrong! Some women do not want that, and some men pretend not to want that. This is why we can't have nice things. It's worth remembering that we are all a product of our time. Female developers in the 80s and 90s were not only a completely different generation, being baby boomers and Gen Xers, but they also grew up largely with different technology and different messaging around attractiveness and beauty. Games were so basic at the time that, like I mentioned, there really wasn't a lot of room to sexualize anything. There were some significant limitations on what could and couldn't be produced, and likely what people were prepared to produce. Today's developers are millennials and Gen Z, generations who were exposed to the body shaming of the 2000s that deemed women like Jessica Simpson, Tyra Banks, and America Ferrera fat. In the 2000s, women were subjected to fairly specific representations of what was attractive and what was not. Most of us were exposed to movies and television shows like Bridget Jones's Diary, Love Actually, and Sex and the City that routinely referred to pretty normal-looking women as chunky or plus-sized. Not to mention, society was becoming increasingly comfortable with the hypersexualization of practically everything, and I have to imagine, at least to some extent, that video games were a representation of these societal standards. Like, yes, all of those things, very bad, but one of the most shameful things we did during this period of time was put too many clothes on top of other clothes. Like, I don't know why Lizzie McGuire is over here wearing 5 shirts. Screw diet culture. Curb your spending habits. The early 2000s was a cursed era for many young women and men, and it set the stage for the pushback that would roll around a short time later in the mid-2010s as the body positivity movement picked up some serious steam. All of this seemed to have culminated in the intense desire to see what many considered normal women in media and entertainment. No more waif-thin supermodels, but everyday, relatable women and girls. And then this gave way, I guess, to whatever the hell we're looking at and seeing and being exposed to today with fat acceptance and all this type of stuff, and I hate it here. And also, just to be clear, this period of time didn't exclusively shame women's bodies. It definitely did that to men as well. But I think a core component to this conversation is that men and women perceive that shaming completely differently, which we'll come back to a little later. Now, with all of this in mind, a population of body traumatized young men and women went on to enter the creative fields. And I think it's clear from media and entertainment today that a portion of these people were invested in the promotion of not only normal bodies, but their bodies. I think this is important to note because there is something about this group of people that means they want to see themselves and their social initiatives reflected in media. Not to mention, reportedly over 40% of gamers are female, female today, so there seems to be a strong emphasis placed on making media that appeals to them. To us. Although, you know, I probably should say that I don't know what kind of gamers these statistics are including in their analysis and whatnot, but I do have to say that, you know, maybe this is including things like The Sims, and if you play The Sims, you're not a gamer. Fight me. Yeah, you Sims people, I am talking directly to you, into your face. Yeah. Now, couple all of this with a few decades of intense criticism towards hypersexualized, scantily clad female characters, and it kind of makes sense why there's this intense desire to remove these perceived sexist tropes from media. And this seems to have resulted in a few things. For starters, many new characters have been designed to meet realistic beauty standards, and existing characters have been downgraded to be less sexualized and overall less sexually appealing. Sometimes these changes are actually executed well, as in the case of Lara Croft. She's been given more clothes and her body has been adapted to look more normal, but she's still very attractive. Just to be clear there. The same really can't be said for characters like Aloy from Horizon Forbidden West and several Mortal Kombat characters. When Horizon Forbidden West was first teased in 2021, the game's main character Aloy was immediately criticized for her new physical appearance. Many people felt that she looked, overall, less appealing. And personally, having played both Horizon games, this is an assessment that I agree with, although I would say that, like, no one in those games is particularly attractive. But it's hard to put a finger on why that is exactly. In an attempt to defend her new appearance, the usual suspects jumped in to argue that makeup doesn't exist in a post-apocalyptic world, she lives in a hot climate, which is why she's blotchy, and even that she's eating more food now, that she's beaten the machines in the first game. I'm not kidding. That is a real thing that people have said, and I don't know what I'm doing here anymore. Regardless, it's clear that someone made a decision to change her appearance when there was no meaningful reason to do so, and honestly, not enough time had passed in the game world between games 1 and 2. It had been about 6 months. I don't know why she looks so different. They also gave her a single same-sex love interest in the game's DLC, and that makes me think that maybe they made her ugly on purpose so that she could be a lesbian. Where's the lie? Sydney, please! Mortal Kombat 1 also experienced similar treatment. The recent release of the game's trailer sparked a tremendous amount of criticism with relation to several characters, most notably Tanya, and the criticism came from two fronts. One, it was noted that Tanya's previous appearance had been scrapped. Her otherworldly features that made her quite beautiful were gone, and she looks nothing like her earlier depictions. And two, the actress on which she is based is very beautiful, and the two now look nothing alike. This, of course, raised a bunch of eyebrows. Why use an extremely beautiful woman if you have no intention of depicting her actual appearance? Something really interesting to consider here is a prevailing attitude in some radical feminist communities that basically says that in order to defy beauty expectations and standards, you have to actively abandon them. Now, obviously, I don't know how many people who work in the gaming industry consider themselves radical feminists, but I think it's plausible that at least a portion of them do. And if these developers and designers are trying to apply their personal social justice or intersectional framework to the creations they're working on, it makes sense why existing female characters are being made progressively less and less attractive. Again, the position here and the idea behind this is that women must actively uglify themselves in order to demonstrate their commitment to female liberation. So this might explain why it feels like we've gone from one extreme to the other. These characters are either beautiful and hypersexualized, or they look like the new Fable character, and nobody can explain why. And sadly, similar to the point I made in my Disney Princesses video, this binary leaves us with very few options in between. Alongside this is the idea that a woman can't simultaneously be beautiful and strong or feminine and independent, and that underscores the subtext that surrounds this debate. A female character, a woman, can't be strong and powerful while also subscribing to standards that are viewed as oppressive. You guys might think that I am lying about this as an ideology, but a radical feminist once told me to my face that wearing high heels is a tool of the patriarchy. I was like, lady, I'm 5'11". If I wear high heels and then stand in a room full of average-sized men, I am the patriarchy. Anyway, this was an attitude that I came into contact with again and again while researching for this video. The need for realism and the inability to suspend disbelief when it comes to hot, skilled, badass female characters. I think it's fair to say that both men and women approach and perceive realism and fantasy very differently. While I was researching for this video, I listened to several female speakers and read countless articles and studies that mention the same thing over and over again. Women want to see realistic depictions of female characters. One 2021 article stated, "Female players are constantly fed unrealistic body proportions, outfits, and armor. It can be difficult to become truly immersed in a video game world where you don't feel respected or welcome." Most of these articles focus specifically on female characters, and there isn't much mention when it comes to men, despite the fact that male characters are still subject to the same standards when it comes to unrealistic body proportions and outfits. Even the article I referenced at the beginning of this video admits that this double standard exists, acknowledging that mods exist across plenty of games that make men shirtless. I guess that men don't really care about that because I'm like 98% sure that most men enjoy seeing other men shirtless. I go to the gym too, guys. I see whose muscles you're checking out, and it's typically not us. At least I'm coming after everyone equally today. Another writer, again in 2021, also expressed sadness around the attractiveness of female characters, writing, "We should be saddened every time controversies over the relative attractiveness of female characters arise. We saw how out of hand things got last year in reaction to The Last of Us Part 2 having female protagonists who didn't have typically feminine bodies. The reality is that women, and more broadly people, come in every shape and size, and they are under no obligation to beautify themselves to appease strangers. We deserve the option to consume media that reflects that." This writer is referencing controversy surrounding The Last of Us Part 2's character Abby, who is muscular and probably not one that a lot of people would consider feminine. Abby did produce a lot of negative feedback, but this likely could be attributed more to the fact that The Last of Us Part 2 did an enormous disservice to the first game, made her character kill another beloved character, and then force players to play as her for the rest of the story. So with that said, while Abby is not stereotypically attractive, people disliked her for a host of additional reasons. And as far as real representations go, I think it's fair to say here that your average woman absolutely doesn't look like this. It's not to say that a designer can't create an Abby-like character because so few women like this exist out in the world, but if the point is to represent normal body types, even this isn't normal. And I suppose that's part of the issue with the representation of females in games. We're still not being given normal women, and to be fair, how could we possibly? Nothing about gaming is realistic or normal. And don't get me wrong, this isn't a bad thing. The ability to play as a highly skilled, extremely attractive person is part of the enjoyment of these games. For some, it offers a level of escapism. Things don't always have to be realistic or make sense. And for whatever reason, devs and designers seem to find this rationale perfectly acceptable when it comes to male characters, many of whom are also sexualized, unclothed, and extremely unrealistic as far as their bodies and appearances go. Even male players themselves are fine with this, given that these characters are potentially a fantasy of what men want to be. Strong, often handsome, armed to the teeth, and skilled in all sorts of combat situations. They are something to aspire to, and therefore, the user experience is more enjoyable because these are characters that men can actually emulate. And not only that, but I think men are better with escapism and fantasy in general. Obviously, we don't really know why that is. Chalk it up to men are from Mars and women are from Venus or something. One last thing that I would like to note before I round out this video and finish it off is that in my travels of the internet, when I was reading the comments of other gamers, I noticed that some of them called out the double standard that exists when it comes to ugly male characters. There are a lot of them, and how people are very unfazed by this. While this observation is definitely true, I think this can be chalked up overall to the fact that there are just more male characters in any and all video games. This means that there are greater opportunities for all different sorts of characters, not to mention the fact that we interpret male and female attractiveness in different ways. So given the fact that we have so few female protagonists, when one is made ugly, whether she existed previously or is a new creation, we notice. we can't help but notice. With that said too, I don't deny that this means that there is a lack of range for these female characters. But I am probably not the woman to ask, because personally I am totally fine with playing as very attractive gaming characters who are just really good at climbing walls. I like the badass boss babes. I think they're pretty great, and unlike other entertainment mediums, this is one of the areas where I don't need things to be realistic for it to be enjoyable. Finally, while I understand and appreciate the desire to tone down some of the hypersexuality in video games, I also don't think that the quest for realism is necessary. And in the end, I think it undermines what makes games so fun and exciting in the first place. Our ability to disconnect and experience something that we don't get in our everyday lives. Now, before I open the floor to all of you, this is just a reminder to check out Foom using the link in the description or scanning the QR code on screen, and they can help you start your habit-breaking journey today. Now, I open the floor to all of you. What do you all think? Are video game characters, particularly female ones, actually getting more unattractive? Do you think that this is deliberate? Do you think that it's not happening and people are blowing this way out of proportion? What do you make of some of the criticisms and arguments surrounding this topic, like the Fable heroine or Aloy, or even some of the Mortal Kombat characters? Do you think this matters? Do you think it doesn't matter? Do you think that it's giving us an indication of where we are heading generally as far as entertainment goes? And what do you generally make of this issue overall? As always, if you have made it this far in the video, congratulations. This was a long one, and I'm certainly glad to have you here. If you are not subscribed to the channel already, I recommend you do so if you want to see more of me and more content like this. Leave a like and a comment, because I do read the majority of your comments and I love hearing your feedback, and I will see you pretty people in the next video.